Pontius Pilate said, "What is truth?" Good question. Let me tell you a story. I always like throwing my kids under the bus. Why not? When my daughter was little, now I should preface this by saying, in our house, when we buy chocolates or things like treats like that, usually they're very good chocolates, and very often they're imports that we brought back all the way from England, where, of course, according to some in my household, they have better chocolate than we had here. And when it's eaten, it's basically doled out. Would you like a chocolate? And you get one. Well, there was this box of chocolate sitting in the fridge, and Tony went to get it and found a box of papers. So she went upstairs to my daughter's bed, a little kid she was at this point. I have to preface, she's not an adult, she was a little kid. And she's sitting in the bed, chocolate all over her chin and on her lips, chocolate on her fingers, chocolate even on the sheets. And her mother says to her, "Did you eat those chocolates?" And she looks her mother straight in the eye and says, "No." What is truth? Well, that clearly is not truth. But most often, truth can't be discerned so simply in our world. And in the larger world we live in, truth is sometimes difficult to discern, even nuanced, you know. It's difficult to say what's true and what's not true. It's driven people in the modern age, much to my horror, of saying things that I've heard a former presiding bishop actually say, "Oh, well, you have your truth and I have my truth." And it starts to make a kind of, well, as if there really is nothing that is true. There is truth. I will affirm from here that there is truth. But it's sometimes complicated to pin it down, find it, because it's nuanced. In the wider world, when we look at any group of people, any nation, any collection of people, when I studied history, I find the fascinating thing about the study of history is you find it's not always as simple as what you first thought. Things aren't always what they seem. History, you'd say, oh, well, the great king or a great general or somebody did this or that, and that's why it happened. But then you look into it, there's more. There's this sort of economic reasons and social reasons and other sorts of things, and truth takes on a different color. Ancient Romans would have understood their great empire they probably would have taught it in school. Oh, this is our great empire is the carrier of great civilization and wisdom, and we're bringing civilization to those pagans, to those absolute barbarians, those Celts that live in Britain, or the Germanic tribes that live in the forests of northern Europe, or those effete and degenerate peoples who live in places like Syria in the east or in Egypt, and to those Jews who are always squabbling with each other in Palestine. We bring, efficiency. We bring a better way of living and a brighter and a more logical way of looking at the world. They sort of co-opted, by the way, Greek philosophy as their own, and they sort of claim that they're bringing this kind of logic and thinking, which they themselves had. But again, you can start to see a bit of the nuance right there. This is what they would have taught to school children, and this is what they would have probably believed, that we are the givers, bringers of civilization. Every empire ever since, and probably before that as well, has always done the same thing. The British Empire, there's a simplistic way of viewing it. The American, we don't call it an empire, but our sphere of influence, we're the carriers of democracy, we're the ones who keep it safe around the world. And that's the good side. Then, as I say, there's other things, and just I'll point a few, just so as not to give you a whole history lecture, but economics. Let's face it, the Romans needed to expand their economy. They needed to just go out into the world just to keep, to fuel their own economy. They needed the business, and that's what they did. And that's what every empire and every great nation does, because there's a whole economic side. So they were in Palestine, not just out of some wonderful desire to be the bringers of good news and law and order and whatever it would be. They were there to to increase their wealth. That's another reason. And there are others. So there are other all sorts of nuanced reasons. There were social reasons. They kind of had to, in some ways, had to expand. They had issues with people trying to get there. Life was good in the Roman Empire, so lots of people wanted to go there. They had, dare I mention it, migrants coming in. Don't everyone, migrants moving into their territory, as people will do when they want a better life. All sorts of things were going on to nuance the history, to nuance the relationship of the Romans to the places where they were. There's a lot going on in the background there. And among the Jewish people, who, after all, we would like to think, and they certainly thought, represented the highest form of religion. Monotheistic. We knew the one true God, the God whom we call by the name Yahweh. We knew that this God who brought us out of slavery in Egypt and brought us to the Mount Sinai and gave us the wonderful law and the kingdom of David and the temple of Solomon, and we have this whole life that was here. Then it got destroyed by the Babylonians, but we built it up again because God is the real God and the true God, and that we have to safeguard our life. And so the leaders of the Jewish people, who were now engulfed in a Roman Empire, worked out a way of kind of rapprochement, with the Romans, the way that they could keep the community safe because this was God's people and special. But it was a tumultuous kind of community. There was always this bubbling up from behind, people from underneath, rather, people who were fanatical and wanted no, it's not good enough to be under the Roman. We need to throw it off, and there was and have to keep that down. There were reasons, you see. There was all sorts of background reasons of why the Romans, who were ever so proud of their law, their legal system, and their fair play, why they were prepared in the face of the Jewish insistence and the fear of a riot, why they were prepared to overlook their law. Why Pilate was finally able to give it. He saw, according to the way John tells the story, Pontius Pilate, the governor, the representative of the Roman state, the representative of that great system of law and order which they were so proud of having spread all over the face of the known world, why he was willing to kind of look the other way, because it wouldn't look good on his CV if he were allowed, a riot had broken out on his watch. The leaders of the Jews were similarly, they wanted that peace. They understood that you couldn't antagonize the Romans because they had the power. In a way, I'm not giving you a good history lesson, but that's a surface sort of view of some of the complications that went in. So where is truth? When Pilate says, what is the truth? You realize this thing is very complicated, and now you're presented with this itinerant rabbi, known for nothing other than doing or healing the sick, for making people who are outcast feel welcome, for attracting people and telling them that God loved them and that they were special no matter who they were, that they were specially loved by God, who came to proclaim the truth. So he said to Pontius Pilate, the governor. The governor, thinking in terms of all the complexity that might have meant, so what is truth? How do we know absolute truth? How can we be sure? Where can we find it? And Jesus, in his condition, brought before him as someone that they were complaining about. He didn't look like truth at all, probably. But we say that Jesus is. Jesus himself said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So what is this truth? And how do we know absolute truth? What do we have? What are we looking for? What do we have here in Jesus, which is so difficult to find in the truths of our nations and our kingdoms and our societies and our everywhere else that we live? the truth that seems so elusive that we're prepared to say, oh, well, you have yours and I got mine, and we're going to not even talk about it anymore. As if truth was somehow that elusive or maybe non-existent. How do we find truth? What is the truth that Jesus represents? And what he represents is the power of God. And the power of God is, in a word, love. In a way, that's in terms of the way the world normally operates, that's an absolute radical and revolutionary thing to think about. The power of God is shown not in, being able to make people do what you want, or tell people what they have to do, or force them to do it. The power of God isn't recognized, isn't made known in armies or money or anything like that. The power of God is in the image that we see there. We can see an image of what the power of God is about. The loving power of the love of God, rather, that gives itself, that pours out itself, that says that this is absolute power. Those that have tried it in some small way in the life of the world, in our histories, those who have tried to exercise that power, even though we don't do it perfectly, have found out it's true. I'm thinking of this, Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement. There was more power in a bunch of kids willing to be battered down by fire hoses, more power in a girl who would walk to school with a bunch of howling white people on either side calling her names, and who would walk in a dignified manner into a school. There was more power in those moments than you or I could even imagine. And that begins to touch on the power of love that Jesus himself came to bring, to tell us about, to witness to, and to show us where real life and real power is to be found. The world we live in isn't ready for that. I mean, they're not ready for it, but they've got it anyway. It's there in their midst. They tried to destroy it. The leaders of the Jews and the leaders of the Romans in Palestine 2,000 or so years ago tried to destroy it, and they could not. And people today still try to destroy it. They still can't believe that the absolute power of God is exercised not in the usual ways of power, but in the power of love. In the power that goes with compassion and mercy and forgiveness and all those attributes, all those gifts of the Spirit that we revel in when we think about them, and sometimes are so bad at doing, but nevertheless, that's what we are about as believers. That's what we're called to be. But in the face of the world, that's not where the rest of the world is. Which means what? It means we either do what the disciples did initially in our story today, in the Passion today. You heard, or we get the impression they either deny, or they run away and hide, or like the women that stood by watching, they just watch in despair as all this goes on, and we see the triumph of bullying and lying and all that stuff that goes on in the world. Which is not power. We can take one of those choices. We can hide away, we can deny, and we can sit by and watch in despair. But I would suggest that what we're called to do as believers is to just take hold of that truth and stand where he stood, on whatever praetorium it is that we live in, that we come up against, and speak the truth that's in us, the truth that we know in our hearts. The power of God is love. The power of God is in forgiveness and caring and mercy. But the power of God is not going to be defeated by armies and enemies. It's not going to be undone by a lawlessness, by lies. It's going to be lifted up. It will slowly bubble up to the surface. It cannot be stopped. That's why we call Good Friday good. Because while it looks like defeat, and it does to the outward eye, it looks like defeat, but it's absolutely the place where the triumph begins. The one who made us, the one who made all creation, the one who sustains the life of this universe, the one who is so great that we could barely even grasp what he is, what that is in our minds. That one has shown us in a way that we can understand, in the person of Jesus, in the Son of God, we can see the power of that love. Jesus himself said it, I, when I am lifted up, will draw the whole world to myself. And we, as believers, are the first portion of that world, of the world to be drawn. But we can't back down. We can't cringe in fear. We can't hide from the truth. We can't stand by in despair and just watch it all happen. We need to, as he himself said, take up a cross and follow him. In the Lamentations of Jeremiah, we hear the verse, is it nothing to you, all you who pass by? Is there no any sorrow like my sorrow? And yet that sorrow is the power of God. The power of God released on this world of corruption, of lies, and all that we know that's out there, the nuanced history where the good and bad are so mixed together, we can barely separate them sometimes. And we're called to live boldly in the face of that. Why? Because we know who it is who has shown us the way. So we take up our cross, I hope, and follow.